What are black smokers?
Black smokers are actually deep ocean hydrothermal, hot water, vents, named after the dark, soot-like material ejected from chimney formations on the ocean floor. The material is actually superheated water, around 662 degrees Fahrenheit 350 degrees Celsius, with very high concentrations of dissolved minerals, mostly sulfur-bearing minerals or sulfides from lava on a mid-ocean ridge volcano. As the hot water meets the cold ocean waters, the minerals precipitate out, settling out around the surrounding rock. Over time, the hollowed-out chimneys grow taller as more minerals precipitate out. Black smokers tend to occur in volcanic vent fields that are typically tens of yards across, with fields ranging from pool table size 43 square feet 4 square meters, to tennis court size 8,288 square feet 770 square meters. For example, vent fields are found on the Juan de Fuca Ridge, a mid-ocean ridge in the Pacific Ocean. Many vents have been discovered since the first site was found in 1977 near the Galapagos Islands. In the small research submersible Alvin, and there are probably many more. But scientists have only explored a small portion of the Earth's mid-ocean ridges.
What are the doldrums?
Sailors used to call the low-pressure area near the equator the doldrums because winds here tend to be very light and variable and, thus, difficult to sail in. The doldrums are found near where the trade winds originate. The expression in the doldrums has come to mean a person who is feeling inactive, listless, or lethargic.
Did the ancient Mayans study the weather?
Many people are familiar with the Mayans' interest in calendars and astronomy. But they were also fascinated by the weather. Sometime between 1200 and 1400 CE they constructed a lighthouse in what is now Cozumel, Mexico, called the Tumba del Caracol. The Mayans put candles in the lighthouse, which served the traditional function of warning ships that they were close to land. In addition, at the top of this lighthouse, the clever Mayans strategically placed a variety of seashells. Depending on wind speed and direction, the shells would whistle at different pitches. Depending on which shells were whistling and at what pitch and their knowledge of what conditions produced storms, the Mayans are said to have been able to predict storms approaching from the Caribbean. The objects are small glass spheres containing various amounts of liquid and gas, and also attached to a piece of metal that is suspended from each one. These floats have varying levels of buoyancy, which could be finely adjusted further by changing the size of the piece of metal attached. Galileo understood that water's density changed with temperature, and so the buoys distinguished by the color of the dyed fluid inside them, would rise or fall within the tube accordingly. You could tell the temperature based on which buoys were floating and which ones had sunk to the bottom of the tube. In 1610, Galileo replaced the water in the tube with wine, alcohol. Galileo's friend Sant'Oreo 1561 to 1636, adapted the thermometer to measure body temperature in his medical practice.
When were the phenomenon of trade winds first explained, and by whom?
Astronomer Edmund Halley, 1656 to 1742, who is usually thought of as the discoverer of the comet that bears his name, was also interested in cartography, oceanography, and the atmosphere. For instance, he created tidal charts and maps illustrating the path of ecliptic shadows. In 1868, he formed a theory to explain why we have the trade winds. Halley correctly guessed that it had to do with warm tropical air mixing with cooler air from more northern and southern latitudes. His idea, though, did not adequately explain why the winds blow from east to west, rather than south to north, as his theory would have indicated. It took English meteorologist George Hadley's, 1685 to 1768, discovery of convection cells to amend the theory correctly in 1735.
What did Sir Isaac Newton contribute to the science of meteorology?
In terms of meteorology, Sir Isaac Newton, 1642 to 1727, is mostly a significant figure because the science of physics and his laws of motion are essential to an understanding of how weather works. Not many people know, though, that Newton also was into rainbows. He was the first to demonstrate how white light is broken up into its spectrum when it passes through a glass prism.
How did people discover that Earth has a magnetic field?
The ancient Chinese were the first to use magnets as compasses for navigation. Though they did not know it, these south-pointing needles worked because the magnets align themselves with Earth's magnetic field. Since Earth's magnetic poles have been very close to the rotational north and south poles, compasses point almost exactly north and south in most parts of the world. Over time, scientists started making a connection between lodestones, permanent magnets, and the nature of Earth itself. The English astronomer Edmund Halley, 1656 to 1742, for example, spent 2 years crossing the Atlantic on a Royal Navy ship, studying Earth's magnetic field. Later, the German mathematician and scientist Carl Friedrich Gauss, 1777 to 1855, made important discoveries about how magnets and magnetic fields work in general. He also created the first specialized observatory for the study of Earth's magnetic field. With his colleague Wilhelm Weber, 1804 to 1891, who was also famous for his work with electricity. Gauss calculated the location of Earth's magnetic poles. Today, a unit of magnetic field strength is called a Gauss in his honor.
How much carbon dioxide am I producing when I drive my car or truck?
According to the Environmental Protection Agency, burning a gallon of gasoline creates 19.4 pounds, 8.8 kilograms, of carbon dioxide. Burning a gallon of diesel fuel creates 22.2 pounds, 10 kilograms, of carbon dioxide. So, for example, if you have a 15-mile, one-way commute to work 250 days a year, and drive a gas-powered sedan that gets 18 miles per gallon, you would produce over 8,000 pounds, 3,600 kilograms, of carbon dioxide pollution annually. Multiply that by the number of people driving every year worldwide, and you can see the problem.
Why was Hero of Alexandria an important figure in the history of meteorology?
We have Hero, c. 10 to 70 CE, also spelled as Heron, to thank for being the first to scientifically prove that air consists of matter. A genius who invented an early steam engine and showed you could harness wind's power with a windmill. Hero showed that air had volume, therefore, matter, with such creations as the pump and the syringe.
What is the Fujiwara effect?
Named after Japanese meteorologist Sakahei Fujiwara, 1884 to 1950, the Fujiwara effect is what happens when two hurricanes come close enough to each other that they begin to rotate around a common central point. For this to occur, the two storms generally need to come to within 300 to 900 miles. 500 to 1,500 kilometers, of each other. They also need to be of about equal strength to remain in this partnered dance. Or else the stronger storm tends to swallow up the smaller storm.
What is NOAA weather radio?
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's weather radio is a 24-hour-a-day broadcast of weather conditions throughout the United States. About 90% of the lower 48 states are covered, including its territories. Working in conjunction with the Emergency Alert System and the Federal Communications Commission, as well as other federal, state, and local officials, weather radio also broadcasts warnings about other hazards, such as earthquakes and tsunamis, or environmental accidents, oil or chemical spills. For example, and public service announcements like Amber Alerts about missing children.
Does the sun emit a constant amount of energy?
The energy the sun emits, technically called solar irradiance currently, is much more than it did when the solar system was young. Scientists estimate that, billions of years ago, our sun only emitted about 75% of the energy it now does. Now, however, the amount of solar irradiance is fairly stable, though not completely constant. It can vary by as much as 0.1%, which may not sound like much. But such fluctuations are big enough to make the difference between moderate and frigid winters, merely warm or searing hot summers. Solar irradiance can be affected by sunspots, but the internal workings of the sun are still so complex that scientists do not fully understand what causes these fluctuations. Despite there being no complete consistency in the sun's energy output, astronomers and meteorologists still refer to a solar constant, which is the amount of energy of all emissions, measured in watts per square meter. Readings are taken at the upper extremes of the Earth's atmosphere, which receives, on average, about 1,366 W/m².
What hurricane names have been retired?
Hurricane names are retired when a particularly bad storm has caused a great deal of damage and loss of life. Countries affected by such hurricanes will petition the WMO to have the name retired and replaced with a new name. Gustav and Ike, both 2008 hurricanes, may also be retired.
What are some other sunspot minimums and maximums?
Below is a list of notable sunspot activity changes dating back to 1000 C. Some of the names for these maximums and minimums come from their discoverers, including German astronomer Gustav Sporer. 1822 to 1895, English meteorologist John Dalton. 1766 to 1844, English astronomer Edward W. Maunder, 1851 to 1928, and Swiss astronomer Johann Rudolf Wolf, 1816 to 1893.
Are there ways I can anticipate a tornado?
Tornadoes are hard to predict with any certainty, and even meteorologists can only issue tornado advisories when conditions are right. Some people believe that hail, wind, or lightning will always precede a tornado, but that is not always the case. Though large hailstones and other inclement weather do often occur beforehand. Another belief is that if you observe the readings on a barometer suddenly dropping, you can expect a tornado to soon form. This is not an accurate method of prediction, either. Such air pressure drops can occur hours or days before an actual tornado hits. The best strategy is to simply listen closely to weather forecasts during bed storms and trust meteorologists to issue warnings when the conditions merit caution.
What is oceanography?
Oceanography is the study of the world's oceans, including the waters and everything in them, animals, plants, and minerals. Oceanographers study the physics, chemistry, biology, and geology of the seas. Oceanography is important to understand in relation to meteorology for many reasons. For example, the oceans have a lot to do with heat absorption, distribution, and reflection, as well as with the water cycle and with levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, among other influences.
How is dry ice seeding used to increase visibility at airports?
When the weather has been cold enough, using dry ice has proved to be effective in clearing fog around airports. Unfortunately, conditions are right for this method only about 5% of the time in the United States.
What was Hermann Flaun's contribution to climatology?
German meteorologist Hermann Flaun, 1912 to 1997, studied climate change on a macro scale. He conducted research on how large-scale changes in the Earth's climate, specifically how the entire atmosphere circulates, affect the environment. He was also one of the first to advance theories on how human beings affect the climate.
Is it ever too cold to snow?
No matter how cold the air gets, it still contains some moisture. And this can fall out of the air in the form of very small snow crystals. Very cold air is associated with no snow because it is usually very dry, and these invasions of air from northerly latitudes are associated with clearing conditions behind cold fronts. Heavy snowfalls are associated with relatively mild air in advance of a warm front or on the backside of a strong low-pressure system. The fact that snow piles up, year after year, in Arctic regions illustrates that it is never too cold to snow.
Can some people with arthritis or aching joints predict the rain?
Many people claim that they can feel a rainstorm approaching because they will feel an ache in their knee, a throb in a tooth, or some other pain in their bodies. in a research study conducted by the University of Pennsylvania. Scientists learned that, indeed, people with arthritis could sense when humidity levels went up and pressure dropped, both of which are good indications of an approaching storm.
How does snow form?
Snow forms in clouds in much the same way as water. Water vapor in the clouds collects around nuclei made out of dust or other particles in a cloud. When the temperature within the cloud is cold enough, and the water molecules begin to make contact with one another, they form crystals. And when the crystals become sufficiently heavy, gravity takes over and they fall to the ground. The distinctive hexagonal crystal pattern of snowflakes occurs because of the six-fold molecular symmetry of ice. Water is composed of one oxygen bonding with two hydrogen atoms in a kind of V-shaped configuration. When the temperature is cold enough and the molecules of water are drawn together, they naturally form into hexagonal rings. This pattern continues as the snowflake grows until it is apparent to the naked eye.
What is La Nina?
It's pretty easy to guess that La Nina would be the opposite of El Niño. Instead of warm waters in the tropical Pacific, the surface waters are inordinately cool. In 2009, predictions were for a La Nina to dominate Pacific waters.
What is atmospheric physics?
A complementary field of study to atmospheric chemistry is atmospheric physics. This discipline has to do with such issues as wave and particle physics, acoustics, spectroscopy, optics, and more. A strong command of mathematics is needed for anyone wishing to specialize in this field. The theoretical work involved has applications in satellite, radar, LiDAR, and other technologies.
What did Benjamin Franklin contribute to the science of meteorology?
Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790, who is said to have discovered electricity by flying a kite in a storm and who later invented the lightning rod, made the important discovery that low-pressure systems caused the atmosphere to circulate in a rotating pattern. He made this discovery in 1743, after unsuccessfully attempting to view an eclipse on October 21. There was a storm in Philadelphia at the time, but he later learned that the skies were clear in Boston that day. Of course, he wasn't able to take an airplane to Massachusetts. But what he did find out the next day was that the storm that had been in Philadelphia had traveled to Boston. From this information, he surmised that the storm was traveling in a clockwise manner from southwest to northeast. Putting two and two together, Franklin concluded that the low-pressure system was causing the storm to move in this manner.
How did lightning cost New York City $1 billion?
A lightning stroke took out a major New York City power line in July 1977, resulting in a blackout that lasted for an entire day. The looting and losses to businesses, in addition to the repairs needed, were estimated to cost the city about $1 billion.
Why do people live in floodplains?
People have lived in floodplains for thousands of years. Fertile land for agriculture lines the floodplain, and the nearby water source makes life easier. Unfortunately, when the river does flood, these communities are severely damaged and people suffer. Hazard mitigation, such as levees, dams, dikes and other structures, attempt to limit damage during floods. Sometimes, when the structures fail, such as a levee breaking, large areas are inundated with water. Inhabitants of floodplains must balance the risks with the rewards of living in such an unpredictable environment.
What was the weather like in China in 2008?
The winter of 2008 was one of the coldest on record in China. Even cities in South China, including Hong Kong, experienced record lows and power outages that sometimes lasted weeks. Over 100 people died as a result of the frigid weather.
Where do meteors and meteorites come from?
Most meteors, especially those that fall during meteor showers, are the tiny remnants of comets left in Earth's orbital path over many, many years. Most meteorites, which are generally larger than meteors, are pieces of asteroids and comets that somehow came apart from their parent bodies, perhaps from a collision with another body and orbited in the solar system until they collided with Earth.
How does the magnetosphere help animal behavior on Earth?
Earth's magnetic field is also very important to animals on Earth that migrate or otherwise travel long distances. Some animals have impressive built-in magnetic sensors. Biologists have shown that many migratory birds figure out where to fly by using Earth's magnetic field to guide them. Humans, too, benefit from the magnetosphere by using Magnetic compasses to figure out which way is north or south.
How many people die in the United States because of avalanches?
Deaths from avalanches are fairly uncommon, but they do occur. Often as a result of carelessness or from not heeding posted signs. Below is a list of fatalities covering the last decade.
Has the Hudson River ever frozen over?
The Hudson River in New York State extends about 300 miles, 483 kilometers. From Lake Tier of the Clouds on Mount Marcy down to New York Bay. When people think of the Hudson, what comes to mind is the part of the river that flows through the New York metropolitan area. This section does not freeze often, the last time being in January of 1918. However, at the higher elevations near the river's source, the Hudson freezes quite regularly.
What are chilblains?
Chilblains refers to the burning, itching, redness, and chapping that can occur when skin suffers prolonged exposure to cold, damp weather conditions.
What is a temperature inversion?
Simply put, this is when temperatures in the troposphere, lowest layer of the atmosphere, are colder at lower altitudes than at higher altitudes, which is just the opposite of what normally occurs. Inversions can occur as the result of weather fronts moving through an area, or because of winds blowing over ground that is frozen over with ice or snow, or because of frigid lake or ocean conditions. When an inversion occurs, it prevents air from circulating vertically, which can result in pollutants being trapped at low altitudes. Inversions also disrupt radio and radar transmissions.
From where do comets originate?
Most of the comets that orbit the Sun originate in the Kuiper belt or the Oort cloud. Two major zones in our solar system beyond the orbit of Neptune. Short-period comets usually originate in the Kuiper belt. Some comets and comet-like objects, however, have even smaller orbits. They may have once come from the Kuiper belt and Oort cloud, but have had their orbital paths altered by gravitational interactions with Jupiter and the other planets.
What was the first satellite used for monitoring the weather?
The first man-made satellite used to monitor weather conditions was the television and infrared observation satellite. Tyro's Eye, which was launched by NASA on April 1, 1960. While the photographs taken were not of the high-resolution standards we see today, they were the first to reveal just how clouds and storms can be remarkably well organized, a fact that surprised meteorologists at the time. Tyro's Eye's other groundbreaking accomplishment was to spot a previously undetected tropical storm near Australia 9 days after its launch. Australians along that country's east coast were thus the first people, thanks to modern technology, to get a heads up that a strong storm was approaching.
What was the first organized network of meteorological observatories?
In 1855 Urbain Jean-Joseph Leverrier, 1811–1877, a French astronomer, organized an effort to establish weather observatories throughout Europe that would share meteorological data in the first cooperative system of its kind. In 1863 telegraphs linked many of these weather stations together through a central hub in France.
How does the motion of Earth around the Sun cause the seasons to occur?
Some people mistakenly think that the seasons are caused by Earth being farther from the Sun in winter and closer to the Sun in summer. This is incorrect. Earth's elliptical orbit is close enough to a perfect circle that distance is not the reason. In fact, Earth is closest to the Sun in early January and farthest in early July, which is exactly the opposite of our summer and winter seasons. The reason for the seasons has to do with the angle at which sunlight strikes any particular place on Earth at any given time of year. The angle changes throughout the year because the tilt of Earth's axis differs from the ecliptic. Since the Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees, the Sun's rays hit the northern and southern hemispheres unequally. When the Sun's rays hit one hemisphere directly, the other hemisphere receives diffused rays. The hemisphere that receives the direct rays of the Sun experiences summer. The hemisphere that receives the diffused rays experiences winter. Thus, when it is summer in North America, it is winter in most of South America, and vice versa.
What is a Mauka breeze?
A Mauka breeze is the Hawaiian term for cooling winds that sweep down from the volcanic mountains to cool the warmer, lower regions of the islands.
How did Charles Fabry discover that the ozone absorbs ultraviolet light?
Fabry, 1867–1945, invented the interferometer, a device measuring how light waves interfere with each other. With fellow French physicist Albert Parrot, 1863–1925. He used this Fabry-Perot interferometer to measure the Doppler effect on light in the laboratory. Then, in a 1913 experiment, he used it to learn that UV radiation is absorbed by the ozone layer.
How much sunlight is reflected by snow?
Since white reflects snow, it should be no surprise that snow cover bounces sunlight back into the atmosphere and into space at an efficient rate of about 80%. Environmentalists speculate that global warming may be accelerated further because, as snow melts, more and more of the sun's energy will be absorbed by the ground.
Where can I get an education in meteorology?
There are numerous colleges and universities throughout the United States and the world where you can earn a degree in meteorology. The American Meteorological Society publishes information on this in its curricula in the atmospheric, oceanic, hydrological, and related sciences, which can be accessed online at http://www.amatsoc.org. The U.S. military also provides training to interested recruits. Online and correspondence courses may be found, too. But these should be viewed more for informational purposes and not for a formal education. Unless the online courses are provided by a degree-conferring, accredited university.
Are the gases in the atmosphere evenly distributed?
You are not likely to stroll down a street and encounter a suddenly high concentration of oxygen or a pocket of unmixed argon gas. The constant motion of the weather due to fronts, pressure changes, varying temperatures, storms, and so on, is like putting the atmosphere in a food processor and hitting the blend button, and never turning it off. The percentage of each gas, therefore, will be constant anywhere below an elevation of 50 or 60 miles, 80 to 95 kilometers.
What is a floodplain?
A floodplain is the area surrounding a river that, when unmodified by human structures, would normally be flooded during a river flood. A floodplain can be a few feet or many miles wide, depending on the river flow as well as the local terrain. Even though levees and flood walls can be built, with homes and businesses built just behind them, the floodplain does not vanish. If the structures break or are damaged, the water from a flood can fill a floodplain, just as it did before humans occupied it.
Are there other terms for describing clouds?
Yes, in addition to the major naming conventions for clouds based on altitude and characteristics. There are also a variety of other Latin terms used to describe clouds. These names can be appended to the main names of clouds. For example, a cumulus castellanus is a cumulus cloud, with formations on the top that look like castle towers. Below is a full list of other descriptors for clouds.
How much air pollution does the United States produce?
According to the Environmental Protection Agency, there is some good news in that air pollution has been slowly declining in the United States. For example, carbon monoxide emissions have gone down from 178 million tons, 161.5 metric tons. In 1980 to 81 million tons, 73.5 million metric tons, in 2007. Volatile organic compounds, VOX, and sulfur dioxide have both been cut in half, from 30 to 15 million tons 27.2 to 13.6 metric tons. For VOX and 26 down to 13 million tons 23.6 to 11.8 metric tons for SO2, over the same time period. And nitrogen oxides have been lowered from 27 to 17 million tons, 24.5 to 15.4 metric tons. Overall, from 1980 to 2007, air pollutant rates have dropped from 267 million tons, 242 metric tons, produced annually to 129 million tons, 117 metric tons. This is still a lot of pollution, without question, but it is significant progress. Especially considering that the US population has risen from about 226 million people in 1980 to 300 million in 2007.
What is the speed of sound?
The speed of sound can vary, depending on air pressure and, more importantly, temperature. The conventionally accepted speed, which is useful for estimating the distance to a lightning stroke, is about 1 mile for every 5 seconds. More precisely, sound travels at 740 miles per hour, 1,191 kilometers per hour. At 1 atmosphere pressure when the temperature is 32 degrees Fahrenheit 0 degrees Celsius. Sound travels faster through water and many other media that are denser than air. In general, because the temperature of the air cools as altitude increases. Sound is refracted upwards and away from people on the ground. Thus, measurable sound decreases the farther away one is from the source. On the other hand, the stratospheric layer of the atmosphere increases in temperature as altitude increases, thus refracting sound downward.
What was the perfect storm?
the subject of a 1997 novel by Sebastian Junger, as well as a 2000 movie starring George Clooney, Diane Lane, and Mark Wahlberg. The perfect storm was also a real, terrifying event. During the last days of October 1991, an extratropical cyclone organized itself several hundred miles off the coast of Nova Scotia. At the same time, Hurricane Grace, a relatively weak Category 2 hurricane, moved toward the storm from the south. As Grace approached the northern cyclone, the winds from the cyclone did something unusual. Typically, tropical hurricanes will tend to move away from the shoreline as they move north. But the cyclone winds, spinning in a northeastern swirl, blew Grace toward the northeast coast. The two storms merged and became known as the 1991 Halloween nor'easter. The result was one of the most destructive storms in history, with winds up to 65 knots. 75 miles per hour or 120 kilometers per hour, and ocean waves up to 39 feet, 12 meters, high. A dozen people died in the storm, including the 6 crew members aboard the sword fishing vessel Andrea Gale, the subject of Junger's novel, and $1 billion in damages were incurred. In another unusual twist, the Halloween nor'easter had turned into a hurricane by November 1st. An event that is quite uncommon for an extratropical low-pressure system, though not unheard of. The new hurricane, however, remained unnamed because the National Weather Service thought it might be confusing to the American media to rename the Halloween nor'easter.
What is atmospheric chemistry?
As the name implies, this is the discipline dealing with how gases and other chemicals and particulates in the atmosphere interact with each other, such as with the formation and destruction of ozone, both in the upper atmosphere and as a ground-dwelling pollutant. Atmospheric chemistry is a very complex science, as the composition of the atmosphere is in constant flux. Content is constantly being introduced from the ground, winds continually shift and flow, and radiation from space interacts with the atmosphere as well. Meteorologists specializing in this field have to understand geology, biology, and industrial pollutants, literally. Millions of different industrial chemicals entering the atmosphere daily, among other chemical processes. There is considerable work to be done in atmospheric chemistry, as much of what happens in the atmosphere at a chemical level is little understood.
What is heat stroke?
Also called sunstroke, heat stroke happens when a person's body temperature exceeds 106 degrees Fahrenheit 41 degrees Celsius. Symptoms include a rapid and strong pulse, hot, dry skin, and eventually unconsciousness. Heat stroke is considered a medical emergency. and immediate treatment is indicated to lower the body's temperature. Fluids, however, should be withheld. Hundreds of people die every year in the United States because of heat stroke. Either while outside or while in an unconditioned room. Pets and livestock are also susceptible to this condition.
How much carbon monoxide is produced in the United States by cars?
As of 2002, automobile traffic in the United States was producing 346 tons. 314 metric tons of carbon monoxide per day.
Can smaller asteroids and comets affect the weather?
Certainly. It doesn't take a huge impact for an extraterrestrial body to influence the planet's delicate weather balance. Smaller impacts could still throw up a considerable amount of dust, comparable to a large volcano exploding. It doesn't take a very large asteroid to do the trick, either. Scientists now estimate that the object that hit Tunguska, Russia, may have been as small as 65 feet, 20 meters, in diameter. But an asteroid or meteorite doesn't even have to hit the Earth to affect our weather. In 2005, scientists announced that asteroids burning up in the atmosphere leave behind trails of micron-sized particles that could increase cloud formation, increase precipitation, and cool temperatures.
Why don't we see hurricanes in the South Atlantic Ocean?
The cold sea surface temperatures of the South Atlantic and atmospheric conditions, such as the tendency of the intertropical convergence zone to remain in the northern hemisphere, make hurricane formation south of the equator unlikely. However, in March 2004, a hurricane did strike the coast of Brazil, which was a very unusual event.
What is marine forecasting?
The complement to aviation forecasting. Marine forecasting warns seagoing vessels of storms and wave conditions. Such forecasting routinely saves lives, property, and fuel. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's National Data Buoy Center keeps track of ocean conditions, particularly issuing hurricane warnings and warnings about swells that may indicate tsunamis caused by underwater earthquakes.
What is the National Severe Storms Laboratory, NSSL?
The NSSL is NOAA's premier research laboratory. Located in Norman, Oklahoma, the NSSL is dedicated to researching and improving weather radar systems. severe weather forecasting, and the science of hydrometeorology.
How is wind speed measured?
Wind speed is measured with a device called an anemometer, which was an invention of English physicist Robert Hooke, 1635 to 1703. The most commonly used type is the rotating cup anemometer, which uses 3 or 4 small cups that spin around a central pole. Modern anemometers of this sort work using electricity and magnets. As the cups spin, a reed switch within the central pole detects each time a magnet in a cup swings by. This sends out an electronic pulse that has been calibrated to calculate wind speed. The data is then transmitted to a weather station.
What are major and minor ice age periods?
Of course, not all scientists agree on how to divide the periodic ice ages, with some calling for a more strict division between the times and temperatures. For example, some scientists believe a major ice age period should be defined as lasting about 100,000 years, with a 9 degrees Fahrenheit 5 degrees Celsius decrease in temperature between glacial and interglacial periods. A minor ice age period, lasting about 12,000 years with a 5 degrees Fahrenheit 2.8 degrees Celsius decrease in temperature. And a smaller ice age period, lasting about 1,000 years with a 3 degrees Fahrenheit 1.7 degrees Celsius decrease in temperature.
What is the difference between a hurricane watch and a warning?
Some would like with tornado watches and warnings. A hurricane watch means that conditions are good that a hurricane will form within the next 36 hours or so. A hurricane warning means that a hurricane is expected to make landfall within 24 hours. Warnings and watches are issued by the National Weather Service's National Hurricane Center.
Who hires meteorologists?
Meteorologists can either work for the government or in the private sector. If they work for the government, they may be hired by a federal government agency or department, such as the National Weather Service, the Federal Aviation Administration, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, the Department of Energy, a national laboratory, or the military, or, they could be hired by state, county, or city governments. Local governments hire meteorologists to monitor such things as air pollution and other environmental and resource management concerns. In the private sector, meteorologists can find employment at television stations, including the popular The Weather Channel, airlines, universities, utility companies, Climate research laboratories. Meteorological equipment manufacturers, private research contractors and forecasting services, weather modification companies. Private environmental organizations and companies, and even litigation support companies. A good place to start a job search is the job board postings on the American Meteorological Society's website at http://careercenter.amitsoc.org. If at all possible. Start building career connections as early as you can, preferably while you are still in school. Through work internships and contacts through your professors or other people you meet.
How do thunderstorms make our planet habitable?
Thunderstorms, of course, usually bring rain or other precipitation with them, which is needed for life on Earth. But other rainstorms can do this as well. What makes thunderstorms particularly unique and important is their role in heat convection. Thunderstorms move warm air from lower elevations to upper elevations. The difference in temperatures between ground level and the top of thunderstorm clouds can be as much as 200 degrees Fahrenheit, 95 degrees Celsius. Causing this air and temperature circulation helps cool our planet by as much as 20 degrees Fahrenheit, 9 to 10 degrees Celsius. Without thunderstorms, therefore, we would already be experiencing global warming. On a scale twice as bad as scientists are forecasting because of climate change.
What is refraction?
Refraction refers to how light is bent as it passes from one transparent medium to another. For example, from air to water. This happens because light travels at different speeds, depending on the medium. Refraction is the reason why we see rainbows.
What is an aerosol?
Many people, when they hear the word aerosol, think of a chemical aerosol spray from a can of air freshener or hairspray. The word actually applies to any solid or liquid particles suspended in air. Because they are so small, aerosols tend to float, e.g., clouds, though like everything else they are subjected to gravity, falling at a rate of about 4 inches. 10 centimeters, every 24 hours, unless washed away more quickly by rain.
What is forensic meteorology?
With the popularity of the CSI television series, there has been a meteoric rise in students enrolling in forensic science courses. Forensics draws on a wide variety of sciences in order to solve criminal cases. For instance, there was one episode of CSI in which a character Used his knowledge of astronomy to locate a murder scene. Meteorological principles can also be used in forensics, which is frequently applied to criminal or insurance investigations. Meteorologists have been called to testify in court, serve as consultants, or perform research for government agencies, law firms, and private businesses. Using data from satellites, radar, and other sources, a meteorologist could, for example, testify as to the possibility of a building fire being caused by lightning, or whether or not wind conditions could be responsible for an airplane crashing shortly after takeoff, or whether hazy conditions leading to a car accident were the result of nature or a nearby factory. Qualification as a certified consulting meteorologist is typically required to work as a forensic meteorologist.
What is irisation?
Sort of a diffused rainbow effect that can produce mother-of-pearl-like colors. Irisation occurs when thin clouds of water vapor, particularly altocumulus clouds, pass below the sun.
How much volcanic activity occurs underwater?
There is a huge amount of volcanic activity taking place underwater, we just can't see it. Some geologists estimate that approximately 80% of all Earth's volcanic activity occurs on the ocean floor.
Are wind farms a good way to solve the energy crisis and global warming?
Power from wind farms seems like it would be a very good solution to at least some of our energy needs. Wind, though unreliably fickle, is free, does not require mining, and is clean. Also, windmills and generators have been improving to make this technology more economical. Currently, wind power supplies about 0.1% of the world's electricity. But that is growing at a rate of about 30% a year. There are problems with wind farms, however. For one thing, the giant windmills you find in places like Southern California kill birds and other animals. Any hapless bird who flies near one is apt to be chopped into bits. Some conservationists are worried this could actually kill some birds on the endangered species list. A 2002 study conducted in Spain of its wind farms noted that 350,000 bats, 3 million small birds, and 11,200 birds of prey were killed by windmills and associated power lines in just 1 year. The Altamont Pass Wind Resource Area near Palm Springs, California, which consists of 4,900 windmills, is responsible for the deaths of 4,700 birds annually, about one per windmill, including 1,300 raptors, birds of prey, such as burrowing owls and golden eagles. Because of increasingly limited land space, Some countries are building wind farms offshore. For example, England is constructing a new wind farm that will cover 145 square miles. 375 square kilometers, off the Kent, Essex, Clacton, and Margate coastlines. Such offshore farms, of course, now pose a threat to seabirds. Another fact is that wind farms take up a lot of space. Situated on hillsides and open plains, they effectively destroy what could be wildlife habitat. Each windmill takes up about 1,600 square feet, 144 square meters, of space. Furthermore, building the vast wind farms needed to power cities takes a lot of resources, including the steel, concrete, and other materials needed to build and maintain windmills and the oil and gasoline that is burned during construction.
What happened at 3 Mile Island?
Three Mile Island, Pennsylvania, was the site of the United States' worst nuclear accident. Luckily, no radiation was released into the environment and no one was killed. In March 1979, the nuclear reactor at the 3 Mile Island plant overheated, breaking the radioactive rods. Pennsylvania's governor recommended a voluntary evacuation of pregnant women and preschool children who lived within 5 miles, 8 kilometers, of the plant. It was the unexpected self-evacuation of residents in the area that created major problems. The evacuations yielded surprising information about the lack of preparedness of communities for such an event, and have led to increased planning and preparedness for nuclear accidents and evacuations.
Is there weather outside the solar system?
In recent years there has been a flurry of activity among astronomers who are discovering more and more exoplanets. Over 200 have thus far been found, and most of these are gas giants. The reason for this is because gas giants, being very large, exert a greater gravitational pull. The most successful technique for finding exoplanets has been to observe how stars move. Observatories such as the Hubble telescope are sensitive enough to detect if a star has a slight wobble to it, which indicates the presence of planets and a solar system. Combining this method with infrared spectroscopy, it is possible to detect the molecular composition of distant planets. Carbon dioxide and monoxide, hydrogen, neon gas, water, and hydrocarbons have all been detected. Astronomers are quite confident that they are seeing planets outside our solar system that have atmospheres, and they speculate that some may have life-supporting liquids and gases.
How did Earth's atmosphere form?
Some of Earth's atmosphere was probably gas captured from the solar Nebula 4.5 billion years ago, when our planet was forming. It is thought that most of Earth's atmosphere was trapped beneath Earth's surface, escaping through volcanic eruptions and other crustal cracks and fissures. Water vapor was the most plentiful gas to spew out, and it condensed to form the oceans, lakes, and other surface water. Carbon dioxide was probably the next most plentiful gas, and much of it dissolved in the water or combined chemically with rocks on the surface. Nitrogen came out in smaller amounts, but did not undergo significant condensation or chemical reactions. This is why scientists think it is the most abundant gas in our atmosphere. The high concentration of oxygen in our atmosphere is very unusual for planets, because oxygen is highly reactive and combines easily with other elements. In order to maintain oxygen in gaseous form, it must constantly be replenished.